Japanese ambush in the jungle below November 1943. And the jungles of Bougainville were alive with the sound of gunfire, the air thick with smoke and the smell of cordite as 300 Marines dug into defensive positions along a ridge they'd been ordered to hold at all costs. Private First Class Tommy Chen crouched in a foxhole next to his radio set, headphones pressed tight against his ears as he strained to hear the transmission, crackling through the static and interference that made every word sound like it was coming from the other side of the world. He'd been a radio operator for 6 months, learned his codes and protocols at Camp Lejeune, but nothing in training had prepared him for this chaos where mortars were exploding close enough to shake dirt into his foxhole, and Japanese soldiers were somewhere out there in the jungle, moving closer with every passing minute. Chen had every reason to be terrified because the Japanese had been pushing hard for 3 days straight, throwing wave after wave of infantry against the Marine positions in an attempt to break through and cut off the entire American advance on the island. Then battalion command came through on the radio. Static, garbled words. Chun pressed the headphones harder, closed his eyes to concentrate, and heard what he thought was a single word cutting through the noise. Retreat. The CO wanted them to pull back, abandon the ridge, fall back to secondary positions before they got surrounded and wiped out. His hand shook as he grabbed his notepad to write down the order, but the transmission cut out before he could confirm, leaving nothing but white noise and the distant sound of artillery fire echoing through the jungle canopy. If stories like this get your heart racing, hit that subscribe button, because we dive into the most insane moments of WW2 every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. What Chin didn't know was that battalion hadn't said retreat at all. The actual order had been to hold fast and prepare for a counterattack, but the radio interference and his own exhaustion after 3 days without sleep had turned one word into another, and now he had to decide whether to trust what he thought he'd heard or demand a confirmation that might never come through the static. Chin stared at his notepad where he'd written a single word in shaky handwriting, his mind racing through every possible outcome as mortar rounds continued to rain down, and the Marines around him kept firing into jungle at an enemy they could hear but couldn't see. If he told the captain they'd been ordered to retreat and he was wrong, 300 Marines would abandon a position they bled to take, and the entire line could collapse. But if he was right and they stayed, every man on this ridge would be dead or captured by morning, when the Japanese brought up their reserves and overran the position in a final assault. He'd been trained to follow orders, trust commands, relay messages exactly as received. But what do you do when you're not sure what you heard, and 300 lives are hanging on your decision? The captain was 50 yards away in the command post, and Chin knew he had to tell him something because officers don't make plans based on silence and uncertainty. They need information even if that information turns out to be wrong. So Chin made a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He grabbed his rifle, climbed out his foxhole, and ran in a crouch toward the command post while bullets snapped through the air and kicked up dirt at his feet, moving through the chaos until he reached the captain and delivered the message he thought he'd heard. The captain stared at Chun for a long moment, his face covered in mud and exhaustion, and asked him to repeat the order, because retreating now didn't make any tactical sense when they'd been told to hold this ridge no matter what. Chun opened his mouth to repeat it, to say the word retreat out loud and make it real, but something stopped him, some instinct or doubt, or maybe just a look in the captain's eyes that said this order didn't fit the situation. He asked to try the battalion again. The captain nodded, told him to get confirmation before they made any moves, and Chin ran back to his radio set with his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. Chun put the headphones on, adjusted the frequency, and called the battalion again with his hands shaking on the transmitter as he requested confirmation of the last order, repeated what he thought he'd heard, and waited for a response that seemed to take forever to come through. Static, more static, then a voice, clearer this time, cutting through the interference with words that made Chin's blood run cold. Hold position. Prepare for an attack at dawn. Support is moving up your left flank. Attack, not retreat. The complete opposite of what he thought he'd heard, and if he convinced the captain to pull back based on his mistake, those 300 Marines would have abandoned the ridge right before reinforcements arrived and walked straight into it. Chen never told anyone how close he'd come delivering the wrong order, just relayed the correct message to the captain, and spent the rest of the night in his foxhole, listening to the radio and double-checking every single word that came through, because he'd learned that in war, one misheard syllable could mean the difference between victory and disaster. At dawn, the Marines attacked just like command had ordered, caught the Japanese forces off balance, and pushed them back with support from the reinforcements that had moved up during the night, exactly the way the battalion had planned it. 300 Marines held that ridge and won the engagement because a 20-year-old radio operator from San Francisco stopped himself from trusting his exhausted ears and asked for confirmation when everything in his training told him to just deliver the message and let the officers make the decisions. Chen would never know if the battalion had actually said retreat or if his mind had simply filled in the word his fear wanted to hear, but he did know that his doubt had saved lives, and his decision to verify had kept him from being the guy who lost an entire company because he was too tired to hear straight. By the time the battle for Bougainville ended 6 weeks later, Chen had handled over 3,000 radio transmissions, and he never once relayed an order without confirmation, even when the message came through crystal clear and there wasn't any reason to doubt what he'd heard. The other radio operators teased him about it, calling him paranoid and overcautious. But Chin didn't care because he remembered that night on the ridge when one misheard word almost changed everything, and 300 Marines almost died because static and exhaustion had turned attack into retreat. Thanks for watching this story from the WW2 Vault about how a radio operator's doubt saved 300 lives on a jungle ridge in the Pacific. Next week, we're covering the bomber crew that flew a mission with a hole in their plane so big you could see straight through to the sky, and how they made it home when everyone said it was impossible. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.